Hello and welcome to the Guitar Hang Podcast. I'm your host, John Stancorb. Today we're diving into the mesmerizing world of Nili Brosh. You might recognize Nili from her extraordinary career, which includes collaborations with music giants like Danny Elfman, Tony McAlpine, Death Clock, and Cirque du Soleil's Michael Jackson 1. Nili's name is synonymous with virtuosity and innovation. We're in for an exclusive journey through her musical universe, exploring her career, creative adventures, and what fuels her undeniable passion for the guitar. Please make sure you hit the subscribe button below and ring the bell for notifications. And now, let's hang with Nili Brosh. You're prepping for a big European tour coming up, right?
Yeah.
Are you right on the heels of that, or do you have a little time to ramp up?
I have a little bit of time. It starts in the beginning of March, so I got some time. I still have like 30 Cirque shows coming up before I leave, like way before I leave. Yeah, so I'm actually about to start that in a week. And then like that pace is pretty quick, so
Yeah.
they
Now,
have me for 3 weeks.
so it's 30 shows in 3 weeks. That's okay.
It's always, yeah, their schedule is 10 shows a week. That used to be my life.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was not easy, but I did that for a couple of years, and now I'm what they call an on-call, and I'm there on average every 2 weeks or so.
Yeah.
But we're having a transition in our full-time lady guitarist, and so to kind of fill in the gaps, that's the thing about being on call is you're on call. So
Yeah.
if I'm here and I can help, I'm happy to help. But I had to cut it off at 3 weeks because I was like, well, I need some time to practice before I go on this tour.
I would think for your gig, it would be like it's not quite the specialty thing of, uh, defusing a bomb, those kind of high, but
But
in
pretty
some,
close.
it, I've seen the behind the scenes through Instagram of what you have to go through.
Hmm.
It's Swiss Army clock timing. I mean, every little detail is accounted for. And it's
And
something, yeah, it's scary.
that's just the prep, like that's just one little part of it. It's not even the thing itself, which is yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, and the fact that you get to shoot flames out of your guitar, that's got to be the kid in you has to be just incredibly excited to be able to live out that kind of comic book kind of.
Oh yeah, the kid and the adult in me, believe me. Yeah, it's that's definitely the one part of the thing that'll never get old, no matter how many shows I did there. It's it's always exciting, and it's always a little bit like, not scary to shoot fire, but it has you on high alert that that's what you're doing, You're definitely like monitoring the situation. Actually, I was there New Year's Eve, and this never happens, because everything again is monitored so closely, but something was not perfect with the pyro, and it wasn't enough for them to, because it's a remote team that
Yeah,
ultimately decides if they're going to fire it or not. I'm just supposed to stand and aim. Um, so they let it go off, which means it wasn't that bad, but there was something about the pyro that it kind of spattered around a little bit instead of like, I mean, it was still shooting straight out, but like it kind of, I'm wearing in-ears and it still sounded louder than usual, and it just in my peripheral vision I'm like, this seems a little weird, and I saw a couple of dancers like turn and give a look that I'd never seen before, and I was like,
yeah,
good lord, I hope it's not me, so it's like every time that when that's over, I am definitely really relieved, because it's still a 30-foot arc of fire that you're kind of responsible for,
right.
and you still have a good 2 minutes in that act before it fires, and at that point you're treating it like a loaded weapon. You're not aiming at the audience. You're making sure to play like up with the neck up high as much as you can, and so you really are taught to treat it like a loaded weapon. And so once it fires, you're like, okay, I can run around now. I can interact with the audience. I can point a little fretboard to the audience now if I want. And in the very few times I can count them on one hand where it didn't go off, you're very nervous, and you do have the contingency option to kind of
Yeah,
leave leave the cue if you're not feeling comfortable. So there's all kinds of things.
Now, prior to doing that, doing it for the first time, did you have a mock-up of the guitar to rehearse with? And then it was the same thing, but equipped with the flamethrower aspect of it? I
Uh,
mean,
ki- Kind of, but almost in an opposite way, where you would train with those guitars and you would train shooting the pyro, but without playing and without the rest of the stuff. Like you were you were taught how to handle the whole situation, where you need to be, where you need to aim. You know where it is in the music, so they let you, you practice the blocking and walking backwards and aiming, and they definitely don't let you do it unless you feel comfortable. Like we have a whole special effects team that's dedicated to making sure that it's treated as it should be.
yeah. Well, it's a very exciting thing to see.
Mm,
It's it's just like anything else. The prep that goes into it. But
sure.
kind of ties into a thing I was thinking about when I was thinking about the projects that you're playing with,
Mm,
performing with. You've got Danny Elfman, Death Clock. You've got the Cirque du Soleil.
right.
Your own stuff, instrumental things.
Yeah.
I always tell my students that want to get better, the best thing that you can do is put yourself in a situation where you have no choice but to be excellent.
Exactly.
Whether that means putting together a tribute band of your favorite group and having
Right.
people come to pay or
Right.
whatever, but put yourself in front of an audience where you cannot suck. You have
Right.
to do well. And
Yeah.
that's the through line, I think, to all those groups is that
Mm,
the following from Danny Elfman, Death Clock, and the audiences for Cirque du Soleil,
right.
you have to have your shit together.
Yeah, you can't. Yeah, you can't phone it in.
Yeah.
Yeah, or at least you'd feel really bad phoning it in, and I think you'd be turned found out. Uh,
And I
but yeah,
forgot Tony McAlpine in that. He's also,
back in yeah, I mean that was really my fuck. It's amazing how long ago it all was now, but that was really my introduction to that kind of thing. That was the original for me, the sink or swim situation where I was like, you wanted me to play with you? You want me to play with Virgil? Do you know what you're talking about? What? Who am I? And they believed in me more than I did at that time. But it was very much the understanding of like, okay, you're given this situation where you're forced to either adapt to it and move up a level and be able to hang, or not. And so I think you're absolutely right.
there's something that you have to move beyond the being rehearsed part of it. You absolutely have to be a great hang to tour because there's many players that could
Yes,
play this.
exactly.
There's a good amount of people that could make the hang and be good people to be on the bus with.
Right.
Have that plus the fact of being bulletproof mentally, because to look around on stage and to see Virgil and
Right.
and to see Tony and players
Right.
that ilk
Right.
and the fans that go with that kind of
Exactly. Exactly.
all those folks with DW shirts or Zildjian shirts or Ibanez. Or,
And the way that well, exactly this. It's funny that you say that because uh that it was exactly my thought when I joined that band, and especially then, I was 22, I was fresh out of college. I was, I'd played with the Iron Maidens a little bit, but having gone to Berkeley, I knew that, crossing the arms, that was that audience. I grew up going to school and being introduced to the world of guitar as this is what an audience is like.
yes,
So I kind of was like almost expecting that in those circles. But I have to say, the funny thing is I think if you show up, it turns out to not be like that at all,
yeah,
because that is really the difference between music school kids and a real audience, is that a real audience, they're not your classmates. They want you to do well. They're there to root for you. They're there because they want to see you play. And so audiences in the real life, I don't think they're that bad, but I know what you mean. And it is, I think, an important mindset to have, because it's a reminder that it's okay to take it seriously and like want to do a good job.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's great to have those all the. I mean, it seems like those are the things that you want. In addition to having your solo career,
Hmm.
have those things that are diverse that
Right.
put in front of different sets of musicians. So it gives you a lot
Mhm.
of variety because I would think that for to do just your solo career would be awesome.
Right.
To have all those other things, I think that's the ideal, having your proverbial cake and eating it too.
I absolutely, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, this was kind of the benchmark career path that I grew up looking up to with my favorite players. You know, you look at the Steve Lukather's and the Nunos and all those guys of the world where they did the sideman thing, they did their own thing, they balanced it, and they went out there and did everything they could. And that was to me the dream of a multifaceted and versatile career. And that's kind of, that was my focus at Berkeley, of like, how do I get good at other genres? How do I make sure that I can play other kinds of music with a bunch of other musicians that have different influences and different schools of thoughts and came from different places? And you do hope that at the end of the day that that equals this kind of life. And I'm super grateful, and I think the juggling act is like the most worthwhile goal and like crusade, let's say, you know. So I think it's like it's a good thing to go for, but it's definitely it's the juggling act. That's
Right.
what really what it is.
Yeah. So if I'm not, I th- I was at the G4 thing in Vegas and
Right.
some of your classes and hear you play. And if I remember correctly, your exposure to your first guitar heroes per se would have kind of been in that late 80s, early 90s, the shred folks,
Right.
right? So that was, and it's an interesting thing because each generation, I think
Mm.
about, and it gets talked about a lot, but it's worth in this format to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
Generation is their baseline is being so if for example, a kid is 7 years old and he finds
Mm-hmm.
out about Mateus Mancuso,
Mm-hmm.
and that's his baseline. So
Right.
he or she must learn Mateus. I'm just kind of flummoxed, like where, because he represents a whole new level of playing in terms of that technique. I'm
Mm.
probably very familiar with his playing. The
Yeah,
guy.
yeah.
It's just amazing to me that for you, your baseline was, I guess, Steve Lukather, Nuno, uh,
Mm-hmm.
Steve Vai, Joe Satriani,
Right.
those type of players. Were you transcribing that stuff? Were you having? I know that you have a brother that plays.
Mm-hmm.
Was that some of the education that you were getting from having a sibling playing? Or I'm interested to see how your evolution of learning
Mm-hmm.
that stuff came about. Because if you're told that if that's what's accepted, it doesn't seem like that big of a deal. But if you come from like a David Gilmour, Jimmy Page
Mm.
thing, that seems like unreal.
I mean, the thing is I think because I grew up with an older brother, Ethan, who's very much into that music, I think I had a he instilled in me a sense of knowing that that's not easy music to play and that they are guitar heroes and that's why they can play and write that stuff. And so I guess in some on some level without I mean listen, I loved Pink Floyd and Queen and I grew up on all that stuff too. So on some level I think I maybe if I didn't understand the evolution, I understood that it's not the same chops. You know, even as a listener, you know, you hear that it's not the same techniques and to a point, you know. So um I think on some level I always understood that that was a high level of playing. Um but you know, I connected it in a lot of different ways. I learned in all, like I had teachers all through growing up. I was never self-taught, quote unquote. I always had a guitar teacher. I've had lots of them. Obviously my brother being around was, you know, he was never formally my teacher, but I learned a lot about the world of guitar, you know, and what the culture is and all those things. But I did do a shit and still do a shit ton of transcription. Yeah. I never really, unless I had to for school or anything, I skipped the part where I'm actually writing it down. You know, to me it was just I used that term to mean learning stuff by ear. But if I had to look back at my practice hours in my life thus far and think about what I've really spent the most time doing, it was learning stuff by ear, and it still is. I mean, to be fair, it does come a little bit more naturally to me. I mean, that's not to say that it was always easy. I worked on it a lot, but it was always my preferred method of working. You know, to some people that's not necessarily how they're going to go about learning something, but for me it just felt like that's what you do. So it's a skill I've sharpened kind of a lot more than a lot of other skills, you know. But it gave me so much, and it's actually ended up being maybe the most useful skill in my actual working life, because I have to learn a lot of sets of music sometimes very quickly, and recall them and rehash them and go back to them and, you know, play them differently the next year, and et cetera, you know, and to go from one tour to the next or whatever. I think it would be a lot more difficult if I didn't feel confident in that.
Right. Yeah, the biggest jump I think from the two schools of playing that we're kind of referring to, the blues-based idiom and then
Mm,
the more advanced stuff, is whereas before, if it's like the solo for Killer Queen or Bohemian
mm,
Rhapsody, Comfortably Numb, some of the other melodic solos, you can learn it phonetically as if you're
right,
singing a song.
exactly.
You're playing the Glass Prison by Dream Theater, you have to internalize those rhythms and feel the pulse of what odd groupings or multiple groupings, nested rhythms, that sort of thing, and have that facility that you can draw and remember those combinations of things.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a very it's almost like two completely, even though it's the same instrument, it's two completely different sports.
It,
Or
it is it is and it isn't. You know, I think you have to take into account that it's almost more case by case basis, I think, because the more musical the player and the more musical the solo, regardless of the grouping or the amount of notes or how rhythmically dense it is, to me at least, like, look, I know, like, I know what you're saying, right? Obviously there was a difference, like we said, in that kind of stuff between like a Nuno solo and a Brian May solo. But to me, it's like when I listen to anything, I'm trying to internalize it as music and something that I can sing, even if it's not slow enough to sing, you know? So like in my mind, there's still always a version that like I'm hearing in my head that I just can't think fast enough for you. You know what I mean? So to me, I'm always trying to internalize music as phrases and just as music, and it's kind of how I approach, like, for example, like I'm talking to my European band now about all the tunes that we're doing for Europe, and there's a lot of odd time signatures, and they're always asking me, how am I breaking this down, how am I thinking about it, and I always have to go back and like break it down because I'm not really counting. I'm always internalizing a phrase as a phrase, and somebody comes back and they're like, this isn't 4/4. I'm like, oh yeah, I guess it is, you know,
now
because
I'm
I'm just,
feeling the pulse of it. Yeah, right.
and yeah, and so to me, the familiarization part of it is a huge part of transcription. Like something that I grew up with, that I've heard my whole life, that I could sing internally to you forever. It doesn't really matter how complex it is. I know it. But if it's something that, yeah, just came through and I have to like really learn what the music is in my head before I go and learn it, that's a longer process. So familiarity is a huge part for me.
Yeah, and I guess therein lies the transition time needed to go from project to project. And
Exactly. And mentally too, you know, it's like you can be totally sharp and on it, and it can come back the first rehearsal and you'd be surprised and all those things, but it's just that kind of switching gear when you're talking about different genres and different people and different hangs and all the stuff that you mentioned. It's just, you can't, I'm trying to be nicer to myself about not expecting it to not have some sort of price, you know, like emotionally, like you're going to be tired, you're going to be like, your mind's going to feel like it's all over the place, it's going to take some organization and like a minute to internalize and meditate on it or whatever. But at the same time, it's just like, of course it's going to be like that. You
yeah,
know, how can we be expected to take that much on and hope that it's meaningful and musical without it taking some sort of toll on us?
right. Yeah, the type of player that we're referring to, yourself or Brian Beller, I'm very attracted to talking to folks like yourself and others like that that have such dense material
Mm.
in different projects, and they sometimes will overlap.
And he doesn't even leave time in between. That's what I'm saying. It's like, at least if I can control it, I'm like, give me 2 weeks. Give me 2 weeks to like get over the jet lag. Yeah, Brian will like hop from one tour to the next and like not even miss a day. I more power to him. I wish I could do that.
Yeah, it's stunning to think about because it's kind of like somebody that's a very high level, like a skills player in the NFL,
Right.
doing some sort of other sport with it's requiring speed and dexterity and all that other thing.
Sure.
Completely different sport, and it's
Yeah.
yes, I'm always very fascinated to hear how folks
Mm-hmm.
together that from the standpoint of rehearsing it,
Mm.
memorization, and then the other things that the tonal requirements for any
Mm-hmm.
given gig. I mean, do you feel that you're at a point now that you because the considerations that you have to have is it's got to sound great, it's got to in some cases fit in the overhead of a plane or a flight aid, or it has to be bulletproof, sound great, easy to get around, but I you know that you're getting the same great quality from gig to gig. Do you
Mm.
have kind of a one size fits all thing, or is it a bit modular in terms of like, I don't know if you're using pedals or are you using,
Mm.
modeling devices, fractals, Kempers?
It kind of depends on the situation. So I use Mesa amps when it makes sense to, right? So like if I'm not flying or if I can have a Mesa wherever I'm going, um, I definitely I still choose to have an amp if it makes sense. That's the kind of player I am. I can't help but come from there. However, obviously, in real life situations, and saving your back is also really a real life situation. Um, so I do have a fly rig. It's the Headrush MX5. I do use their other modeling products for just like a lot of the videos that I make that are home based and whatever. It's just a really easy, quick, high quality way to record in a pinch. So I do feel like I have that dial to a point with the gigs that I need it for, but certain other gigs like a Death Clock tour or something with Danny where the infrastructure allows for uh, a different set of gear and pedal boards and things like that, then that's what I choose. And then so I do have like a my Death Clock pedal board is tiny. It's like a mini pedal board, which is almost on purpose kind of a joke because you really don't need much on a gig like that. It's like being a thrash rhythm guitar player basically. Um, so I really wanted to reflect that being the gig where it's like straight amp tone metal. Um, and then for Danny, I need a bigger pedal board because there's a lot of soundscapey textural things. And while, it's possible to, I feel really good about the modeling things. I don't have those patches like quite worked out for that type of thing. And when you're talking about shows with an orchestra at the Hollywood Bowl and things like that, having amps and stereo is really great. So I'm trying, you try to cater to the situation, what makes the most sense for it. If I can play amps and stereo on a big gig, I'd rather do that, But if I'm flying, it's
Yeah,
like you said.
yeah. Are there any players from the past or any new player, anything that's doesn't have to be guitar players, could be of any
Hmm.
instrument or genre that you're drawing inspiration and maybe in a way that fans of your music would be uh, kind of surprised to hear about, or anything that
In terms of my writing or my
no,
playing, or
you're listening to that. The one thing about being on the road and having time, there's sometimes the last thing you want to do is listen to music,
Mhm.
because you just kind of, you, especially at the end of a tour, you just want to kind of chill out, maybe listen to a podcast, whatever it might be.
Yeah,
Is
yeah.
there something that you're drawn to go on Apple Music or to do a deep dive into something? Is there something from the past that you will we'll get into, or something new that you've checked out? I've been on
I
this
mean,
Cooter kick recently, and it just
mm,
rediscovered how cool it.
right,
There might be the guy that does the soundtracks for the Wes Anderson films.
right. I see. Yeah.
Just curious if there's anything like that for you that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things. I love Thundercat. I'm a big Thundercat fan, and I love the cheekiness of it that it provides in tough times. I like the doesn't take itself too seriously thing. Uh, I I don't know if you've heard of it. There was a show on HBO. Now it's on Netflix, I guess, but called Insecure, that takes place in LA, and it's got like a super versatile, great hip hop R&B soundtrack, and they have all of the seasons in order, like all of the music that was soundtracks for the entire show. So it's like a huge playlist, takes days. But like, just totally different than the stuff that I go listening to day to day, just uh so.
Yeah, it just, yeah, whatever. It's not anything in particular. It's just whatever happens to be in
I
your.
mean, it can be either or, but I kind of like to go outside of what I'm used to.
Yeah. The process for writing new material, is it? Do you find that it's one of those things where it sounds like you have a setup in your home where it's pretty easy to put ideas down and demo
Hmm.
things? Uh, you know, break out Logic and get some sort of click going and come up with new ideas, or messing around. I'd be interested to see how your uh, writing process has evolved. You've got 3 albums of your own right now,
Hmm.
Spectrum and 2 others.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I've written in all kinds of ways, but my preferred doing it way of doing it now is I tend to hear a melody in my head, or maybe a melody plus some other arrangement notes that I may have or whatever, and I usually really just jot them down by singing into my voice memos. And once I'm sure that I've jotted down any important note that I may have about it, I kind of put it down. So that's actually my first step, can be done anywhere, and doesn't actually have to be near Logic or anything like that. But when I'm ready to start fleshing out ideas and demoing them, then I kind of sit with a list of ideas that I know where I'm going with and are kind of already there, and that's when I pull out Logic and just kind of start demoing the different instruments to the best of my ability, and that's why you hire other musicians.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
putting ideas down. I mean, it's great to be able to have something to just, because really that's what you're doing is.
Yeah, you're just trying to communicate as much as you can or want, to the level of details that you want, to whoever you may hire to play on it. So I kind of take it as far as I can, as far as translating what I hear in my head to the best of my ability. And then I say, like, hey, this should be played verbatim because it's exactly how I heard it, or this is something where your input would be really great on because you play keys and I don't, and however I may lay these voicings may not be the way that you play them, and that's going to give it the more realistic approach. It just depends. But I think as long as you're communicating the bulk of it, that's kind of the idea.
I would think that playing with players like Virgil and some other really great drummers, I'm always fascinated by the way that they think of things and the way that they perceive. I've heard some of the most interesting exchanges between drummers perceiving certain rhythms and
Yeah.
how they internalize certain groupings and that sort of
Right.
thing. So I'd be interested to hear any of your stories interacting with drummers like Virgil or.
I mean, a lot of it is just, you don't always see the process. You're just kind of the art of doing things remotely and sending files back and forth. A lot of times people like that because they can take the time and digest something and figure out what they would do with it. So it's more a back and forth of, here's my idea, here's my bullshit a groove that I know is not really going to be there. What would you do here? And then you get something back, and now the whole tune changes and kind of takes on a life of its own. And now you go back and you're like, okay, how does this now reflect my ideas? Does this mean that this is exactly the way that I wanted this riff, or is now how it's sitting inspiring something else? Like, is the melody going to change, or is it just going to be played now with like a different spirit because it's more in context and it makes more sense and it brings something else out from you? I mean, it's like it's just a back and forth, and the more of those pieces you put in there, the more the tune evolves.
Yeah. The I know it can be a challenge when you're writing. You have to take into consideration as you're writing material for your solo album, performing that and having it played as a good representation of what's on the album. Uh,
Mm.
is there ever things that you would like to have on, like certain overdub, different tunings for acoustic guitars or layered
Mm.
guitars, nylon string? I I know of your electric playing. I don't know
Mm-hmm.
much about if there's any other things that you like to work on, like if you do any nylon string stuff or steel
Well,
string.
I don't know if you'd heard my album Spectrum, but it's got a bunch of like nylon string stuff on it, and it's varied in genre. I mean, that's actually like the whole point of the record. It's an actual spectrum of genres.
Yeah, I
Um,
know. That starts with Cartagena. Is that the first one?
hmm But also, I mean, there's actually a lot of these kind of alternate tuning layers and guitars in a lot of tunes that you wouldn't necessarily pick out. Like in the rhythm parts of Silence of Saturday, there's like a Nashville tuned guitar and a 12 string, and just to like create textures and layers and stuff like that, um, that may not necessarily be like popping out of the mix.
Yeah. Is this are these you're doing this with real like real guitars like
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
line six kind of thing that had
No, no, I when I'm recording for a record, I try to do everything like 100% like mic'd and real guitars. And sometimes if I don't have a really nice instrument, I'll try and borrow one from somebody or get the right pair of mics, or because I am already not a real player when it comes to these other genres. I'm already faking those, so I might as well like at least start with the real instrument.
yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? It's like I'm never going to be a real flamenco player. It's not how I grew up. It's not where I came from. So for me to just exemplify a tune that I heard in my head that I think requires nylon string guitar, I might as well at least try to have the real thing.
Yeah, I mean, and the thing is, people that are listening to it are getting the flavor of that's what you're trying to put across anyway. You don't have,
Exactly. That's the point. Exactly. I mean, I'm not trying to sell anybody on me being the player that I'm not. I'm just trying to make the music contextually fit where I think it's supposed to go.
yeah. Through the through your formulative years, were you ever in a situation of teaching? Did you ever take that path? I mean, as a,
Yeah.
I know that
Yeah.
obviously I know you've done clinics and that sort of things.
hmm
I don't know your past as far as education goes, teaching lessons or master classes, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I've done a bunch of that over the years, especially when I wasn't touring as much. I did a lot of Skype lessons before it was cool. Like before the pandemic got everybody on Zoom, and it was the most normal thing that ever happened to everybody. And actually, I kind of started out my career very young at like as teaching summer courses at Berkeley when I was a young graduate, and they were summer programs for mostly high school kids. It was some kids that were older or adults or whatever. And I would teach these guitar ensembles and try to figure out how six guitar players should play a Satch tune all together. And it's like, and that was tough, because when I just got out of school and I was doing that, a lot of those kids were really talented and like not that much younger than me, and I was like, I don't know what to teach you, but they had this vote of confidence in me for some reason, so I definitely tried to give it as much as I could. But I actually come from a whole family of teachers, and it's so instilled in me from day one. So I find it like it comes pretty natural, and I do love to do it when I have the time. It's just it's been a while.
Oh yeah, yeah. Is there something that something that you would? I mean, I've taught for about 35 years, and there's like three or four things that I see students run into on a regular basis that are
Mm,
things that seem to be consistent in terms of, I mean, one of the basic things, and I'd be interested to get your feedback on this. There seems to be a point when somebody gets really serious in playing electric guitar and maybe they've learned some blues things, um, and then they start getting into more complicated music, extended, whether it be progressive or Joe Satriani, whatever it might be.
mhm,
They feel the need to get more into theory and modes and that kind of stuff, and
mhm,
they learn what I would call the grids of the roadmaps. But they're what they would do, anything that they had in an interesting sense of phrasing that they were getting from the blues thing, as soon as they tried to make the switch over into playing something of a modal thing, harmonic,
right.
it might be, the phrasing went out the window and they felt like
Mhm,
I've got to play the note from the lowest root note
right.
3 octaves up, three
Right.
octaves back, as quickly as without
Right.
any, there's going to be a listener on the other end hearing you play, and you're the ultimate listener. You have to listen to every note so my point is that the phrasing went out the window when they were trying to assimilate new ideas.
Right.
Are there any things that you would see consistently that players would run up against that was kind of like that made you scratch your head and go, I wonder why people.
Yeah. I mean, that's the one that you mentioned is definitely a big one. Um, Phrasing going out the window in general, I think, is something that guitar players do really well because we don't have to take a moment to breathe ever. We don't have to take a breath to play our instrument, so we can butcher phrasing and play forever. You know, like you're not going to pass out if you play too many notes, but you would if you were playing the sax. So you learn a natural sense of phrasing if you sing, for example, because
Right,
that's how their vocabulary, that's what it's built around. Anything they've ever dealt with is built around that. And like you're saying, like guitarists that focus on scales, well, what's the content that usually makes? You know what I mean? It's like it's fodder for overplaying.
right.
So yeah, so I think that's one big thing. One is a lot of misdirection and misinformation about not necessarily misinformation about the modes, but a lot of confusion about how to use modes, how you really apply them, how they make music. Bless you. Bless you. We learn them in such a relative way on the guitar that we don't really hear each mode on its own and what it's supposed to sound like, and the fact that each of them are its own worlds and sounds, and they're meant to be. It's like we miss the point that they're meant to be their own entities because they have a relationship to each other. We focus on the relationships, and that's how we miss the point. So I think that's a big one. I have plenty of beef with how guitar is taught in a lot of these ways because I think both of the things that we're referring to is kind of like learning the guitar backwards. You know what I mean? It's like trying to learn everything and then sifting through it and whittling it down to one or two notes instead of starting with a couple of things and then expanding out to the rest of the fretboard. Or so
Yeah,
I think again, it's a lot of it's just the culture of playing guitar. You know, there's been so many things that have been kind of passed down as way to work out something, and just like you said, it's like we start with the shred based on our influences or the our generation, and we don't always see the connection to, well, how does this connect to like the rest of the music that I'm trying to play.
yeah, it can be a very um, it can be very confusing and put blinders on if your
Yeah,
reference is playing to backing tracks in your home, but
that can be a thing. Yeah,
nothing will lift the veil off and make you go, "Oh shit," than playing with a group in any context and
sure.
out some of those ideas, as soon as you hear it in real time, you kind of are like, oh, that's why that doesn't work.
Right.
Oh, I get it. But if you're not playing with other musicians to try out some of those ideas, and there's nothing wrong with trying anything as long
Right.
as
Of course.
a musical end to it. But I think that is the other thing, is that some of these things get answered very quickly as soon as you have a live rhythm section of some kind, or
Yeah.
players, especially if the players that we're referring to are better players, because that's the holy grail. If you can get in a situation where you're rehearsing with or learning material with better players than yourself,
Of course. That's
nothing.
the goal.
Yeah, that's a
That's the goal.
beautiful thing. Uh,
Yeah.
so the tour is coming up, and
Yeah.
that's super exciting.
Yes.
Are there any other things that are on the wish list of, because it seems like most players that I encounter have this really cool project that's coming up, but maybe just a bit over the horizon. They've got either another recording, or there's always
Hmm.
the idea of not wanting to go too long with the phone not ringing. So I didn't know. I know you've got a ton of stuff, so you may want the phone to be quiet for a while.
No, I mean, I don't mind. Listen, I love phone calls, but yeah, I mean, I definitely have a busy 2024 coming up. Some things have not been announced yet. I'm really always hoping to find time to work on my next album, because I basically wrote, well, I had voice memos, right? But I fleshed out pretty much my whole new record on the last Death Clap tour, and I really want to work on it.
Yeah.
So, it's all time management, but especially after the pandemic, I can never complain about doing shows, being on the road. So I don't really care if everybody has to, including myself, wait a little bit more for new music, because I love performing. I'm happy to be out there. So there'll be more of that.
Well, it seems like you have a very healthy, at least in as much as a person can ascertain through social media, but you post things that seem like that's a very healthy pursuit. Being outside,
I'm trying. Yeah.
dog, being, those are, anytime I see a fellow musician that's doing those things, I'm like, that's really good mental health stuff.
Balance is important. What's the point if you're not enjoying your life? And I'm already the kind of person that takes everything to heart and deals with guilt over things that they have nothing to do with, and all this kind of stuff, that I'm like, I may as well try to enjoy my life, because I find it so hard to begin with. I mean, I love everything I'm doing, but I do find it hard to take a break, so I force myself. So I think you're right.
Yeah,
It's important.
because we're told that at least the success, the big A word, the algorithm. You gotta work you gotta get your stuff out there, and you've got to keep.
Yeah, it's a grind, but we can't let it be 24/7 just because social media is 24/7 now. Like, we have to establish like ground rules, or else we're all going to go crazy. I mean, we're already, it's like, it's already hard not to do it 24/7, not to feel expected to be outputting 24/7, but again, it's like, it's only up to us to make the standard for what is healthy, and what is like sane.
Yeah,
Like, I really want to stay sane. I want everybody else to stay sane. So
yeah. I mean, having a variety of projects, but then doing things that keep you grounded, and you know,
just living your life. I mean, the same goes to everybody. We can't just be on this thing all the time, like this, right? Like, it's wonderful to connect, but I think most of us still want to really connect. So
yeah. There are so many benefits to this thing, but also at the same time, yeah, it's very easy to get sucked into the whole
yeah.
chasing after the algorithm thing.
Yeah, well, that goes for all of us. So at least we're in this together, right?
Absolutely. Well, I just want to thank you so much for your time here.
Thank you. Yeah, it was wonderful. Thank you, man. Thank you so much for a lovely interview.
Thank you. Have a great week.
You too, John.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for tuning in to the Guitar Hang Podcast, interviews with noteworthy guitar players from around the world. Go ahead and hit the subscribe button and ring the bell for notifications to stay updated on our latest episodes.